Now, Mike Talks Big on the Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
This is the Mike Talks Big podcast, opinion-based Minnesota sports talk and entertainment, plus trending topics and stories heard on demand on zonecoverage.com, which is now the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. It's all together. It's all the same thing. Mike Talks Big, it's the name of the Twitter account, the name of the Facebook page, the name of the show. Subscribe on iTunes or Google Music. I found Google Music a little easier, but if you've got an iPhone, obviously iTunes works for most people. Coming up today on the Mike Talks Big podcast, self-will is the enemy of Mike Zimmer and the Vikings. If you can't take care of yourself, how can you take care of your football team? We'll talk about Mike Zimmer's future with the team. We'll also talk about, with the Vikings wrapping up training camp, kind of the misleading information you get from training camp, and especially like the last day when the big sports station in town covers the last day of training camp, giving you the perception that you might learn something from that. Also, former Viking Matt Burke comments on concussions in the NFL. And I'd like to get into plays at home plate and how they have become strictly objective now. So Mike Gelfand joins the program. Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm good. I can't wait to hear about the plays at home plate because, I personally think they're great. But
well, you want to start there?
Yeah, because I think we disagree, so that'll be a good thing.
Yeah, well, here's my belief. The other night I just saw Brian Dozier. I don't know that you saw the play at the plate against the Texas Rangers, but he nearly caught his cleat, and he actually wound up being safe on a real close play. It was a high throw to the Texas catcher, and it was touch and go. It was close play, right? In reality, the catcher was in the base path, okay? The reason that Dozier wound up being safe was he was blocking the plate. The reason that Dozier ended up being safe is because the catcher was airborne to catch the ball, and Dozier was able to get under the tag. So my point is this. There's no consistency in the calls, okay? So
you don't think they've really got it all together yet?
Well, no. I mean, it's very subjective. And what would have happened if the catcher would have landed a split second earlier and would have blocked the plate so Dozier couldn't have scored? Yeah. So now do you go to, and let me elaborate on this, swipe tags, blocking the plate, not blocking the plate, review whether the catcher was blocking the plate.
Right.
Catchers, in my opinion, and you're talking, I just want you to know you're talking to a former Little League catcher. Are you intimidated?
Well, you're talking to a former Little League coach. So
there you go. Coach is always right. But anyway, so there you go. To me, I see it as this. Catchers are at a huge disadvantage because, Mike, everything has to go perfect. You got to catch the ball, not block home plate. You got to make the tag. Everything has to be perfect.
Well, yeah.
And so most of the time, these are either non-plays at home plate or the new big highlight. There's one on MLB.com right now of this tricky, are you ready for this? Tricky slide that these players are coming up with at home plate and 8 out of 10 times these guys are going to be safe anyway, and there's not going to be a play because there's just too many things the catcher has to do right. That's my beef with it.
So let me ask you this. Can you block, say, third base? So if there's a throw coming to third, the guy's going to slide in. Can you just get in front of third and block it?
Yes, it happens.
You can't.
Well, okay, I could just, if you got the time, I will show you that while it may be in the rule book, it is not enforced. So
you don't think it's enforced at any other base except you're just saying it's only.
When was the last time you saw a first base? A player.
Well, you're not going to see first base.
Why not?
First base, right? Because they know that it would be really stupid to do it.
Ken Herbeck used to do it.
Well, he got away with lifting the guy up. Yeah.
Sure.
But he shouldn't have. I mean, that was absurd.
You don't see it much at second base because the runner is at full speed.
Right.
And the middle infielders do not want to get hurt, but you see it at third base. You do. You see the base blocked often.
Well,
at third.
Yeah, but if it really was blocked completely, then that would be obstruction, right?
It would be.
You wouldn't be able to do it in theory. So I don't know why you should be able to do it at home. I never did. Plus, when I was coaching Little League, I told my catchers, I told everybody on the team, this was before this rule, that the most stupid thing you can do in baseball is block home plate, because 9 times out of 10, the ball gets knocked out of your mitt. Whereas if you just did a swipe tag, the guy would have been out. But instead, you're subjecting yourself to a pretty serious injury, and you're not helping the team anyway defensively. So what is the point of it?
Well, here's my argument completely against that is because as a catcher, I have to figure out at exactly the right place to stand. As a matter of fact, why don't you do me a favor and mark a spot on the field someplace, at least put a chalk line there so I know approximately where I need to stand to catch the ball to make a swipe tag.
Yeah.
Because, by the way, I happen to be calling a baseball game, and I'm trying to manage pitchers and all that stuff, and all of a sudden we've got a play at home plate. I've lost my bearings because there's a lot going on during the game, and so I have to stand in exactly the right spot. I have to receive a perfect throw from the outfielder, or damn near perfect, and I have to make sure that I'm exactly the right. I got to be equidistant. Remember that term from geometry?
Sure.
From home.
I never knew what it meant, but I remember the term.
I can't be in the baseline, so I have to reach, and my timing has to be perfect against a nimble, very fast player, generally, usually a pretty fast player scoring from third base. Mm-hmm. It's got to be perfect. I mean, it's ruined the game.
I see your point.
Yeah.
And this rule, like a lot of other rules, is one that is eventually the rule will be defined by the way it's actually called on the field. You've got wording in the rule book, but the fact of the matter is it's just how it's enforced that's going to define the rule.
Well,
and maybe at some point they go back and they tweak it.
That's what I described this segment as, is that the plays at home plate have become subjective, which means that this is what drives me nuts. And I'm not completely against all of the instant replay and all that stuff. But basically what they're saying is that the other night in that game where if the catcher would have landed and blocked Dozier at home plate, they would have reviewed the call to see whether he was blocking home plate, which is like a rule for a rule.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens, but I just always felt like there were a lot of unnecessary, just stupid injuries, either from the catcher or the runner at home plate. And also what you had was pretty routinely you had guys sliding into home, you had the catcher blocking the plate, and then you had the fight afterwards. So this just eliminated that.
I thought you were a fight fan.
I'm not, actually. I think that fights are stupid in any sport. There's no sport in which I think there ought to be fighting. And baseball was always sort of a, I wouldn't say a violence-free game by any means, but there were just a few situations where you could depend on it. Obviously, you got a guy like Sano who thinks he's the king of the world. The ball goes near him and he's running out to home plate. You got these situations where guys are hit by the ball and they're going to start a fight. And sometimes maybe they're in the right, but that's one situation. The play at home was another. And that was basically it. Those were the two areas where you'd have fights. So they eliminated one of them.
I look at the plays at home plate as being the soccerization of baseball.
Yeah.
Everything has to be perfect. Just as I explained a couple of minutes ago.
Soccer is very popular, by the way.
And here's the point, is that even when the umpires could be wrong, New York will generally agree with the umpire's original call because they want to confirm how sharp MLB umpires already are and, make the case that replay simply enhances an already brilliant crew that we've put on the field.
Yeah, and I can see where it's kind of embarrassing to them when they're constantly overturning calls.
Well, they're never going to allow it to happen.
They do. I mean, the fact of the matter is they do overturn a lot of calls with replay. Because, after all, everybody can see it. So they look kind of stupid if they don't.
Well, have you noticed the bigger the call, the more they stick with the original call?
I haven't seen that. Of course, in theory, just like in football, they always say it. It's got to be,
conclusive.
And the fact of the matter is you see a lot of borderline calls overturned. So I don't think that's really true, that it has to be definitive.
I'm just saying that here's a game that's really struggling to find its identity right now because do you have balls and strikes called by a computer? What's happened to the play at home plate? It's the play. Whatever happens at home plate is anything can happen. I mean, you hear a play-by-play announcer say it. I mean, there's always an analyst and a play-by-play guy, and it's good television for one of them to take one side and one of them to take the other side. Mm-hmm. But in reality, this is not like your typical, ESPN debate where they've already decided before they start who has what side. This truly is. Nobody knows which way the call's going to go at home plate.
But I think just watching the Twins games, I think I think they do a great job of ruling on these replays. And the reason I know is that Dick Bremer will say what he thinks they should do, and they almost always do the opposite, which proves they're right. That's the Dick Bremer litmus test.
I can't deny that.
If he says it's a curveball, it's a fastball. If he says it's inside, it's outside. If he says he's safe, he's out.
I'm going to give Dick Bremer some credit here because I've heard him in a couple of pretty interesting conversations lately on the air.
Yeah.
And one of those they brought up the other night with Roy Smalley on the air. They were talking about, have you noticed that there's not a lot of broken bats anymore in baseball? And,
I did. I heard that, and Roy explained why.
Yeah, that was actually.
But see, that's Roy. Forget about Bremer. He's a buffoon, but.
But let's okay. Maybe Roy Smalley needs to be getting more airtime because I thought it was a very relevant thing to bring up.
Roy Smalley could be a national talent calling games if he could just stop saying really, really, and very, very. But he can't. It's some sort of OCD. It's a disorder. And you put him on a national game, and he says really, really 200 times, which he will. It's embarrassing.
Well, you're the grammar police. It has nothing to do with
grammar. It would be more like diction, but
sure.
He just can't. He can't STFU. He just cannot help himself, and it's awful.
You just called me out for diction. What'd you call me? But yeah, well, here's what I've always thought about live radio, and honestly, if you listen to your favorite morning show and hear the repeated crutches that most morning show talent have and afternoon drive talent, it's what these broadcast consultants work with you on all the time. I have my own crutches.
Right, we all do.
Yeah, everybody has things that they fall back on, and there's nothing worse than when you use the same expression twice within 30 seconds, and you're like, damn, because you can't reel it back in.
Yeah.
So here's the point, is that Roy Smalley's coachable and could be a national guy if somebody would work with him.
I have often thought that I should just send him an email and saying, Roy, I can help you with this. We'll sit down, and we'll go through a list of maybe 100 adjectives that you can use. And you'll never have to say very, very, or really, really again. But, again, I think it's a mental disorder. So I'm not sure he can be helped.
Well, here's what I call it. Show prep.
Show prep.
You could talk to Dave Benz about from the Timberwolves. He's actually really good at that kind of stuff. I've talked to him about that kind of stuff before. But, yeah, this so the technology, apparently, they figured out a new way to construct these baseball bats so they break less often.
Yeah.
And before we started taping the podcast, I actually pulled up a link, which I'll put in the notes, which shows some of the highlights of broken bats that nearly killed players in the past.
Not only players, but fans. Fans have been badly hurt by these broken bats. Baseball's liability is soaring anyway with all the line drives going into the crowd. And the problem is it was always a danger. But there was a time when people in the stands were watching the game. But, of course, that time is gone now. They're not watching the game.
Which makes it even more dangerous.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because all they're doing is looking at their devices.
Well, what was it? About 3 years ago, that woman was hitting the head with a broken bat in a Dodgers game?
Yeah. Yeah. No, between the line drives and the broken bats, as you say, you don't see that many broken bats anymore.
No.
And not only that, but then you don't have to listen to another buffoon, Jack Morris, say 18 times a game, that's the best sound I've ever heard is that bat breaking. Meanwhile, they're carting someone off to the ER.
Well, baseball doesn't get a lot of credit for doing many things right.
No.
They did this right.
Well, it took them a long time, to figure out they needed a little more netting in front of the stand.
Here's the story on this. The day after this woman in June of 2008, she got hit in April, but in June of 2008, MLB's Safety and Health Advisory Committee met to discuss the issue,
Mm-hmm.
and they got in touch with the U.S. Forest Service, which operates, are you ready for this? Who knew these places existed? A wood laboratory in Madison.
Man.
Where researchers study things like construction lumber or ways to use underutilized wood like the trees killed by pine beetles. The league called up a guy named Dave Kretschmann, a research engineer. He went to work on it, and after a few months, they were already nearly on their way to solving a problem that had been around for decades.
So that's all it took.
Yeah.
Man.
You know how it is when everybody knows a guy?
Who knew?
All they had to do was call Dave.
Yeah. Well, probably just all they had to do was make one call, actually, which would have led to another, which would have led to another, and eventually they talked to Dave, which I'm sure is what happened. But they had to wait till they had a few $100 million in lawsuits. So when you say, oh, we need tort reform, nobody should be able to sue anybody because it just empowers the lawyers, this is why you have lawsuits. If you didn't, that would never have happened.
So let me get this down. You're for suing.
Oh, well, hell yes. You got to remember that was my dad's favorite pastime.
Sure.
The Gelfands are litigious. Although I've never actually sued anybody or anything except for MetLife, which denied me my disability pay because I had a sleep disorder. But other than that, unlike my dad, just one. Now my dad really got started when he sued his next door neighbor Kaplan because Kaplan's air conditioner was too loud. And my dad had like a little device that measured sound levels, a little decibel meter. He had it hanging by a pine tree outside his window, so they could get the definitive empirical data.
Well, enough's enough.
Yeah, exactly. I thought my dad really. I went over to my dad's house one day, and he's like drawn and haggard. This was many years ago when he was in his prime. Like he was 55 or something. And he said, I couldn't sleep last night. He said, that air conditioner, something has to happen. And last night, I drank 2 entire beers, and I still couldn't get to sleep. That was probably the only time in my dad's life when he consumed 2 beers within a single, 48-hour period, I'll say.
Well, I think when you reach a certain age, that suing becomes a pretty good option. Because
my dad, don't get me wrong, I mean, he started out when he was young.
Suing?
My mom slipped on some wet cement at Dayton's back in the day, Dayton's department store. So that takes us back probably to the 60s, I'd say. And so my dad sued Dayton's because my mom had slipped. I believe there was a settlement on that one.
Well, here's an opening for an injury attorney sponsorship.
Yes.
If anybody's listening.
Yes.
So our sales guy, Lane Christensen. Lane, you hear that?
Lane's on the case.
Lane, get on that, would you? I see that as a good opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So.
And I could do a personal endorsement there.
All right.
I'm looking for endorsement money. I'm not getting any.
Well, I'm a little partial, but I would argue that this podcast is better than most of the sports talk you hear in this town.
Well, absolutely.
I mean, when you listen, when you don't have to work for anything.
Yeah.
Then it sucks pretty bad. Some of these sports talk shows in town, I left this market for 15 years. Mm-hmm. Came back and same thing.
Same old thing.
Yeah, it was exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Well, it's tough, because it's like anything else, people get entrenched. And then they just do the same thing day after day.
Well, and if it pays well, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, that's the whole point. Yeah, it pays well, and they just do their shtick. And people, I think it's just like people listen to the same music all the time. People's tastes get kind of locked in maybe somewhere around adolescence. It never changes after that.
I've always had a diverse interest in all kinds of music.
Yeah.
And and being a former disc jockey, did I ever mention that to you, that I used to be a disc jockey?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Did you ever try to make it big in, say, one of those Eastern markets?
There's some talk about it.
Yeah.
There's a few rumblings.
Yeah.
But so the thing that whenever I had to go to these social events, and there's not anybody that will attack you more than an accountant or an engineer,
Right.
Or somebody that's never been in the industry about the music that you listen to or the music that you
God,
play.
I heard it all the time, and I had, of course, luckily when you're doing morning radio, probably any radio, but I had to sign a statement every month saying that I was payola free. No one had approached me about getting a record on the air.
I did the same thing.
Obviously, I had nothing to do with any of that stuff. But every month I had to.
Hell, you can't even sing.
Well, how do you know? You've never heard me at the karaoke night at the VFW on Lindale.
Well,
that's a great place. And there's like at the end of the night, say about 1:40, there's this huge woman wearing a muumuu who gets up and tells
Are you sure
people,
it's a woman?
What's that?
Are you sure it's a woman?
No, it's definitely a woman.
Okay.
I think it meets most of the standards. And she gets up and she glares at everybody. There might be like 200 people in the place. And she says, "That's it. We're done. Get ready to leave." And then, shocking any first-timers, she sings "God Bless America."
And that's the way they go out, huh?
That's it, and so it's really true. It really is not over till the fat lady sings.
Man, did I fall into that one?
But it's true. It's true. A true story.
It really happens.
Yeah.
Well, it's as they say, Mike. You've got to see it to believe it.
I recommend it highly. I might even be there, so maybe you could stop and say hi. I might be on my second beer. And I won't linger on this too long, but of all my years as a music DJ in the business and hosting morning drive shows, the thing I hated most was people that came up to harass me about, they would say this. How many times have you heard this one? How can you work at that job playing that music? Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Would you take 6 figures to play 4 songs an hour?
Yeah.
I would. And the whole thing about my music interests are everywhere between NWA to, Green Day to, I don't know, everything like across the board, everything from hip hop to classic rock,
right?
Everything.
Jason Isbell, right?
And here's the point, right? Exactly. And here's the point. I'm not arguing with you about it because I have more experience in the industry than you do, and my opinion about my music, which is personal, is not up for debate with you.
Well, see, now you're obviously contentious, obstreperous, disputatious, but me being more of a negotiator, conciliator, me looking for common interests, what I'd always say to people is, look, do you think I like hearing Against the Wind 300 times a year? And that usually would clam them up because I would portray myself as the victim.
Genius.
Well, I got it from my grandmother. My grandmother, Bertha Lerner, who couldn't stand any acrimony within the family. So one day I was about 8 years old, and she was babysitting us for the first and last time. And this must be some sort of Romanian tradition. She came from Romania because my brother and I started to fight, and she started to yell, and then she started to beat herself about the breast.
That's different.
Yeah, well, she was sending a message. You hurt me when you argue. We had no idea, of course, we're not able to really figure that out.
But you shut it down quick, didn't you?
But it did. We were so astonished that we just stopped fighting and walked away.
Yeah,
she never came back.
Yeah, I just it's something that you just don't have time. People's music is very personal. Right. I don't really care what music that you listen to, and I have to laugh when you don't make a living in the business. And passion's fine. I mean, people have high passion for movie and music and all that kind of stuff, but I had never understood the verbal assault. All right, let's move on and talk about the Vikings. Training camp, okay, we can talk about it coming up in a little bit, and we can talk about some new stars in the team and some more injured linemen. I don't see the team, I have to tell you, things don't look particularly bright. when you look at Mike Zimmer and what happened in the offseason, this is what I teased at the top. Self-will is the enemy of Mike Zimmer, and it looks like to me it's that self-will is the enemy of the Vikings. Remember last year when he just pounded these linemen just over the top with trying to get linemen to block and bringing in new guys and pretty much tyrant behavior from everything that we know.
Oh yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the season's over. The Vikings collapse the second half of the season. They take off hot. They collapse the second half. And then this summer, we kind of see more about who Mike Zimmer is, a guy who couldn't get a job in the NFL because he was rumored to be what? A tyrant, right? So this guy winds up, Mike, have you ever heard of such a thing? 8 eyelid surgeries because he won't properly take care of himself.
Yeah, he won't take a week off.
And do you know who won't take time off? Martyrs, people that, it's kind of like I work with a guy here who's a martyr, okay?
Yeah.
And he just never stops working. He works all the time. His health is not particularly good.
No.
And look at what happened to Mike Zimmer. You got this guy who's trying to show everybody that self-will. Remember your high school coach from high school? Everybody's high school coach. You just got to push through.
Got to push through. Push through it. And of course, no water breaks for you.
That kind of thinking just doesn't work in today's professional
guys are
sports
making a lot
world.
of money, and they for some reason they want to be treated like human beings instead of like big sled dogs.
Well, the way I view this, and if you look at somebody like a Steve Kerr, and you see the chemistry that the Golden State Warriors have, I think there's something to be learned about just the way to treat people and the example to set. Now,
you know who really sets a great example? A guy who is not obsessive about his work. That would be our president. Here we are in the midst of this international constitutional crisis. He says, I'm going to take 3 weeks off. Now that is a leader. That is a role model.
Well, if you're gonna call him out, you actually should call out all.
I'm not calling him out. I'm saying he's a role model.
Well, right. Well, what about all of Congress? They're going home too, right?
Well, they always go home
for a month.
Well, they used to. The deal with congressmen is they used to take the week. Every weekend actually they wouldn't work Thursday. So about 4 o'clock Thursday, they wouldn't work Friday. So 4 o'clock Thursday, they're on the flight back home, right? Now they have to fundraise all weekend. So that might explain why Congress is so messed up, because these guys never take any time off.
Well, they're fighting the wrong dog.
Exactly.
I mean, they really are. They're not solving our problems. They want to get themselves reelected.
No, they're running for reelection. From
24/7.
From the day the election results come in, they're running for election. What's 2 years? 2 years is nothing. It doesn't work. 2 years, you're going to be fundraising every single day. That's with the 2-year term.
Everybody talks about restructuring taxes. They probably need to restructure the way Congress is elected, how long they stay in office, and how they raise funds.
Everybody needs a breather, Everybody needs a little time out. Maybe 3 weeks is too much, but everybody needs a little time out. And Zimmer is just the wrong kind of role model. And plus, it's just stupid,
Well, listen, I don't even want to knock the guy. I respect Mike Zimmer. When I heard him say he could find a defensive back at the 7-Eleven in Bloomington, I love it. I mean, I think it's great. If you're really a good coach, then you believe that you can coach players to that level. You can teach them how to play the game.
Right.
But what this tells me is Mike Zimmer has a high fear of failure. This has to work out for Mike Zimmer.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work out look at Bill Belichick. He failed miserably in Cleveland.
Right.
And then he figured out that I think what he figured out was that I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to go do it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, I'm going to live with the results. And as tough, as much of a hard ass and as much of, as impossible and with the media that Bill Belichick can be, I think in reality he knows what he's doing. And I think his image in the league is not exactly who he is. I don't think that he's that kind of, just a hard ass that it's succeed, at whatever level exceed at all costs.
Yeah.
And with Mike Zimmer, I see a guy it's like somebody that's pressing, right? Somebody that's working in a job, and you're just like a quarterback or a pitcher, like, Gibson of the Twins. Every time they're on the mound, you can see that it's just like, God, it's just, there's so much effort that goes into it.
Too much.
So unless Mike Zimmer can learn to live with himself and just breathe a little bit and let the team breathe a little bit, I don't see how him and Spielman are back next year. If they both keep pressing this year, because they already got problems. The offensive line, there's injuries to the new player that they got from Riley, whatever his name is, from Detroit.
Yeah.
The new offensive lineman, he's down, right?
He went down the other day, yeah.
And so things don't look, the big talk is about all these changes in the offense and the new running back from Florida State. But, boy, there's a lot of things that have to go right for the Vikings this year to win 8 games.
At least they're getting guys from Florida State, so that they're really pushing the high quality character guys. So, but while we're on the subject of football, it probably should talk brain damage, don't you think?
Well, let me just wrap up by saying, how many wins for the Vikings this year?
Well, Vegas, I think, is saying 8.5 is the over/under. At least it may have moved now, but that's what they were saying. But I think 7.5 is probably a better line.
For Vikings fans, I'm sure that it just sounds like we're just being critical of the team. For 6 months, I've been saying this is a 7-win team.
Yeah.
And all this stuff that's happened in training camp, I don't think much of it matters.
No.
I don't think the change in the offense. I mean, I think what you're going to see is flashes of brilliance from Dalvin Cook. And who knows what's going to happen with the running back that they got from the Raiders.
Yeah.
And only thing that Mike Zimmer and the Vikings can hope to do is to overachieve this year. And that happens sometimes in the NFL. I mean,
it could happen, yeah.
And look at the Packers. Their front office guy already announced that they're coming across the state to play in the Super Bowl in our brand new stadium.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it, aren't you? It's going to bring in something like $22 trillion of economic impact.
Can you confirm those numbers?
Nobody can.
Yeah.
Because they're, whatever the numbers are, they're entirely bogus.
Well, who comes up with them?
The people who want to steal money from the taxpayers.
Sure, the people that want to continue to have large stadiums and teams funded by taxpayers.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, so former Viking Matt Burke,
right?
He works for the NFL, right?
Yeah, he's a shill for the NFL. He's turned his back on his fellow players in order to shill for the NFL. I don't know, maybe he actually believes that, a few concussions are good for you. I'm not sure what his thinking is. But he's out there. He's challenging this incredible study that the NFL did, which results of which were published.
I've got the details right here, Mike. He says
111, right? 111 brains they studied.
The brains of 111 deceased former NFL players were studied, and 110 of them, yes, all but one, had evidence of CTE. The study was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association.
Right. That's, by the way, chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Yes. The brains here are from players who died as young as age 23 and as old as 89.
Right.
And they are from every position on the field, quarterbacks, running backs, and linebackers, and even a place kicker and a punter. They are from players you have never heard of and players like Ken Stabler, who are enshrined in the Hall of Fame. Some of the brains cannot be publicly identified per the family wishes.
Bubba Smith, right? Wasn't he one of them?
Yeah.
Or who am I thinking of?
I haven't seen that name, but I don't know for sure.
I have to look at the list, but I know Stabler was one of them. Yeah, Bubba Smith was one of the brains.
Okay, so here's the comment from former Vikings center Matt Burke. He jumped into the dialogue with a tweet, I guess in the last couple of weeks, linking to the New York Times story, asking this question. What about the 15,000 or so deceased former NFL players who lived full lives and didn't have CTE?
Well, they of course, he can't responsibly say they didn't have CTE. That's absurd. Maybe, and they obviously there is some self-selection here because they're looking for families and players to agree to have the brains donated to science. And so, yes, most of those players clearly had symptoms that were troubling. But still, 110 out of 111, that is kind of shocking and troubling, wouldn't you say?
It is shocking, Mike, but here's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Money.
Ulcerative colitis.
Whoops, sorry about that.
Fatigue.
It's not really that.
Weight loss. Reduced appetite.
Ulcerative colitis.
This is what I hate
more
about
than
the
a
web.
bathroom
It just
disease.
will jump right in and just start playing audio at any time. It's not ulcerative colitis. It's CTE is what the problem is.
Right.
Money. It's money. It's a money issue. How much money? Because what happens once you see that there's damages? We just talked about attorneys and your dad suing over the air conditioner and the number of decibels the air conditioner was putting out, and that people sometimes have a right to sue.
Sure they do.
So how do you distinguish between the people who legitimately have a right to sue and the ones that are just there to collect a check? Because, okay, it does matter if there's people that are trying to ride the coattails of people that deserve the money. That's wrong. Right? That's fraud. How do you, and the amount, think about how astronomical when you talk about tort reform and all that other stuff, how crazy the numbers could get with a league like the NFL. How do you, if these players do and their families do deserve damages, how much and who pays it, and how do you know you got the number right?
A lot of cases where people sue for medical reasons. The problem you have is when large corporations like the NFL or like the tobacco industry lie and say there's no problem, say everything's fine. If they face up to the problem, if they show good faith, if they do everything they can to reduce problems and be honest about what the problems are, they're probably not going to be liable, for huge damages. But the NFL has always, they've just deny.
Mike, do you trust the police?
No.
Okay.
I don't trust any authority.
So if
I hate authority. So yeah, politicians, police, corporate presidents, pretty much anybody. I don't trust anybody who has authority.
Okay, so if I call you into the room for questioning about the lunchroom incident, and I think you know what I'm talking about. I call you in and I tell you, Mike, we're going to go a lot easier on you if you just come out and tell us exactly what your part in it was.
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
Are you going to come out and tell me what your part in it was, or are you afraid that it's going to be worse for you?
Well, I'm going to lawyer up.
So what are you going to do? You're going to take the fifth? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm going to do.
So why can you?
I'm going to hire me a mouthpiece.
Why can you begrudge the NFL for not doing the same thing?
Well, there are a couple of levels. One is morality, and the other is just fiscal responsibility. And both of them would lead to them just being honest about it and doing their best. But they lied.
What if I take those words as a cop and I say exactly those words to you? How about a little personal responsibility, Gelfand?
Well, I already have that, so I don't. What do I? I mean, I'm absolutely a paragon of virtue. So there isn't any issue there. Plus, I'm way too old to do any damage.
Well, I'll have you know I'm a pillar of the community.
I know you are.
So.
And I'm more like a pillar of salt, but I don't want to get into the Bible here.
Yeah, I mean, this is only a 1-hour podcast.
Yeah, that's why I won't. So now the NFL is starting to figure out they have to make a good faith effort. And after denying it all these years, now you got studies like this, and it's just silly, it's stupid, it's fatuous to say, oh no, well, we have to study the 15,000 other brains because many of them, if not most, won't show CTE damage. No, it doesn't matter anyway. If all 15,000 somehow turned up clean, it wouldn't matter because you still have all these people whose lives are totally messed up because they played football. But obviously, many of the players who are playing today will have some kind of brain damage from it.
So how do you know who to give the money to and not who to give the money to? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I don't know. I mean, who's suing? I don't even know if anyone's suing the NFL.
Does everybody have to? Well, at some point, Wasn't there some kind of settlement like 5 years ago?
There was a settlement
yeah.
with the Players Association,
Right.
yeah. And that's because the NFL continually lied and continually did nothing to prevent injuries. And they've got a long ways to go still, obviously. They got to develop better helmets, and they have to tweak the rules or change them to minimize this. A guy launches his body. A guy who can, a 290-pound guy who can, run the 100 meters in 9.6 seconds, launches his body head first into another guy's helmet, and they don't even throw the guy out of the game. They say, oh, that's 15 yards. That's just stupid.
Well, it's gladiator mentality.
They got to start tossing guys. Hell, they do it in college. Why don't they do it in the NFL?
So do you know who Chad Cox is?
No.
He's one of the higher-ups over there at the ZoneCoverage.com podcast network.
Uh-huh.
And smart guy. And he brought up a great point talking about MMA versus boxing.
Yeah.
And he defends MMA to the end, and he's got a good argument. And you know what that argument is?
I have no idea.
If you took those stupid padded gloves off the boxers, we would know who was hurt immediately, and we wouldn't get their brains, they're sloshing around in their skull for years and years, causing this kind of brain damage. We know immediately if you're punching somebody in the face with your fist that the damage is apparent, it can be addressed immediately, and
right.
You don't have these kind of hidden symptoms, the CTE, which would be very similar, Mike, to the NFL, right? Because you're wearing this padded helmet that really doesn't jibe with the way the human body was designed to protect itself, which was like, we have what, an endoskeleton? Isn't that what it's called?
I have no idea.
Right? And so we've got this, we don't have a shell on the outside of our body, so we have this skeleton, which is inside our body, and we've got this nervous system in our brains which protect us from these serious injuries. And you have things that occur like what? Like swelling and, what's the other stuff? Like, have they gone into shock? People go into shock for a reason, all these kind of things. And so his point, which I'd like you to respond to, is that why don't you just let people run out there with all this padding and protection on, and then you'd find out immediately.
So that you know right away, you wouldn't have to wait.
Right.
It's a novel argument.
Well, you know what it does, though? It redefines the discussion, I think.
Well, it definitely does that. I'm not sure in a productive way, but it does that.
Well, isn't it typical human nature, though, to try to do something to help out? No good deed goes unpunished. Let's put helmets on for them. Let's put padded gloves on our fighters so people don't get really hurt.
Yeah.
Terminally.
Well, Probably we shouldn't elevate barroom brawls to sport. I think you maybe have to draw the line somewhere. And to say, well, people naturally have this bloodlust, and so you're not going to be able to stop it. So why not charge money to see it? I don't know. I find that failing in many ways.
Well,
that argument
some civilizations over time have shown that the gladiator matches have actually increased morale.
Well, yeah. Well, I imagine temporarily, at least. Yeah. I mean, on the long run, I don't know, but
you know what the value of gladiator fighting, I guess, is. Remember the movie Gladiator?
Sure. Not to be confused with the porn movie Glad He Ate Her.
Right. Which you got to be careful when you're downloading those things because you could get in serious trouble with your wife.
You never know what's going to come up.
Yeah, but what happened to that movie was you fought for your freedom, right?
Right.
And so that was a reason to live in these medieval times, as a chance to have a free life. And who was the actor in that movie?
I have no idea.
That was, Russell Crowe.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
remember?
That's right. Russell Crowe.
By the way, a very good movie. It came out in the year 2000.
Yeah, I remember the movie.
4 out of 5 stars.
Yeah.
And
don't you think the movie was, however, a morality tale? Maybe you're taking it somewhat too literally.
Explain.
Well, I'm just saying, what was the message of the movie? Was it that this is a great thing and we should have more of it?
Well, I do have the plot summary here.
Oh, well, okay.
Maximus is a powerful Roman general loved by the people and the aging emperor, Marcellus Aurelius. Remember that?
Sure.
Before his death, the emperor chooses Maximus to be his heir over his own son, Commodus.
Uh-huh.
And a power struggle leaves Maximus and his family condemned to death. The
Right.
powerful general is unable to save his family, and his loss of will allows him to get captured and put in the gladiator games until he dies.
I
The
see.
only desire that fuels him now is the chance to rise to the top, Mike,
Yes.
so that he will be able to look into the eyes of the man who will feel his revenge.
Aha. So revenge is a good thing, in other words. And I can't argue with that.
The
by
three
the way.
biggest things I've done in my life are based on revenge.
Well, they always say that the best revenge is living well.
Oh, I thought you were going to say more revenge.
But I think I think that probably in truth the best revenge is more revenge. It's just like free speech, Someone says something that's obnoxious and disgusting. What's the remedy? It's more speech. Same thing, right? More revenge.
True that.
Yeah.
If some is good, more is better.
I've tasted revenge once or twice in my life, and it was a pretty sweet nectar.
Okay, so here's the last thing I want to hit on. I kind of wrote a piece on this that I'm thinking about sending to you.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'm a fairly smart guy. I kind of think I'm of at least average or slightly above average intelligence.
I would agree with that.
And I would start at this point by making a declarative statement in that I feel that I got a shot at being a writer because I start every one of my pieces with a declarative sentence.
It's what I preach.
Sure, it's what
Get out there.
It's what I've learned
Make your
from
case.
All right. So this I
don't have to do that, but you do.
Right, I do. Yeah, exactly. I've written this piece that I want to send over to you that talks about this. Sports entertainment choices exceed chances for Minnesota sports teams. And what my point is this. We've got all these entertainment options in the Twin Cities with sport teams, but our real chance to win an opportunity, win a championship is very limited.
Right.
And you will love this. I tied music into it. It's barely music, but there's a mediocre, if not insightful song stretch by a British singer named Howard Jones that adequately describes the current state of professional sports teams here in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a poorly written song, but it was hardly a hit during a time in the late 80s when there was truly a moonhole for quality talent. Do you remember the late 80s and early 90s?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
There wasn't a lot of, but this song...
There were a lot of dry wells,
artistically. This song is entitled No One Is to Blame by Howard Jones. And maybe you remember some of these lyrics. Wikipedia describes the song about unfulfilled attractions, saying that they're normal and commonplace.
That's true.
It used a number of metaphors such as you can look at the menu, but you just can't eat. And it's the last piece of the puzzle, but you just can't make it fit, right?
So true.
So the way I see it is this Minneapolis-St. Paul market is saturated with entertainment options. It's great for quality of life, but it doesn't do much for your rep as a winning fan, right? The cities have become towns of choices, not of chances to win a championship. So the Super Bowl's coming here because we've got this brand new stadium that they built.
Right.
By the way, they're working on it again.
If you fleece the taxpayers for enough money, you get the Super Bowl.
Right.
If you could just build a new stadium every year, you'd permanently have the Super Bowl.
And you could arguably you could make the case that the taxpayers were fleeced for the light rail system that also will service the Super Bowl too. I mean, if you wanted to.
All right.
But that's,
That's another discussion for another time.
Right. I ride the trains, so to each his own. But here are the facts, all right?
Mm-hmm.
The Vikings' last playoff appearance was in 2010.
Yeah.
Okay, the team's gone through quarterback, star running back, offensive lineman, coaching changes. All right, injuries, arrests, all kinds of stuff, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a team that's irrelevant, all right? Let's move on to the Wild. Another underperforming team that should be winning but isn't.
Right.
I'm not knocking the franchise or the ownership. I truly think that the ownership is good and they're trying to win, but the team lacks grit and scoring punch. They don't win important games. They peak at the wrong time of the season.
Yep.
They don't have a goalie that can stand on his head. All right?
Yep.
The Twins already threw in the towel for 2017. They traded their best closer and recently fired 4 scouts.
Well, that's what you do in baseball.
All right, so
August 1 comes along, you either sell or you buy.
Another irrelevant team, all right? The expansion MLS Minnesota Loons are winning a few games, but they're nothing really more than an expansion team, right? It's going to take a while.
Yeah, I get it.
And so here we go, Mike, expanding the entertainment choices while not getting anywhere in terms of chances. I mean, now you can say, whew,
Well,
winter is coming, and so are the Timberwolves.
To use a football metaphor, they keep moving the goal line.
Who's they?
The powers, the authorities, what we used to call the bosses of big sport. Because you look at, for one thing, you've got constant expansion, right? The NFL will have 42 teams pretty soon.
Well, if you're not getting bigger, you're getting smaller.
Well, exactly, and I'm getting smaller, and so I feel that. So it gets harder and harder. There's more competition, and then there are always it's just like in horse racing where you have super trainers. In football, you have super coaches, super organizations like New England. So why do they dominate? What do they have? What's their secret? We don't really know for sure. We know they cheat, but everybody cheats. They just cheat better, right?
So you're just saying that we're not trying hard enough.
I'm saying that you got to be willing to cut a few corners. You got to, yeah.
Remember
maybe we're not willing. Maybe we're not able. I don't know what it is.
Well, if you're not cheating, you're not trying hard enough.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
You know who said that, right?
Who said that?
Eddie Guerrero. Do you know who that is?
No.
If you're not cheating, you're not
Sounds
trying.
like a jockey to me.
That is a jockey.
Oh, okay.
You're not cheating, you're not trying, and nothing would apply more in horse racing than horse racing, right?
No, the cheating is the name of the game.
Yeah, so let's back up here a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We got all these sports teams. I mean, what do we want to be in Minnesota? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I don't have that.
Mediocre,
answer.
I would say.
Well, what we want to do is be relevant, right?
In fact, I'm just writing a piece for the zone coverage site talking about Minnesota's aspirations of mediocrity.
Well,
applying it to, of course, baseball.
Well, I think your thoughts are aligning exactly with mine, and I'm not I'm not ripping on all the teams, but what I'm saying here is this: why are we comfortable with the fact that we just keep adding entertainment options? If you take a look at this, oh my God, you got all the former major sports teams. You got PJ Fleck and the Gophers over there, and you got Gopher men's basketball,
right.
And then you've got, like, I'll be damned, now we need to have and I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying, here comes another one. We got this MLS team, and then, oh, by the way, the Lynx and the Saints. I mean, there are so many unbelievable number of entertainment options for sport in this town.
Yeah.
And arguably not one of them is a viable championship contender even.
No, we're just looking for something to serve as a distraction.
Imagine all the money that's gone into all these stadiums and how much money that people pay in the Twin Cities metro area for all these different teams, and none of them have a shot of winning.
And by the way, this is one of the reasons why you see the commissioners of every sport pushing for more and more legalized gambling options for fans, because when I think that Silver, the NBA guy, Adam Silver, I think what he said was that when people gamble, they become highly engaged in the sport, right? Which means, of course, that they don't have to worry about their home team winning. They don't want that. The NFL wants people to just be able to get off gambling. Fantasy football, the point spread, the office pool, you name it. But that's what they want, because then it doesn't really matter. Then you're not even fans of the home team anymore. You're just looking to be on the right side.
Aren't people buried in their phones enough already?
I'm sure they are. But this is one more thing to be engaged in. So, yeah, that's why there's this craze, where, of course, it was only, maybe 20 years ago when most of the commissioners of most of the sports were saying, well, it'll never happen, we'll never allow it. And now you've got a situation where Las Vegas will have every sports franchise there is. And they used to, like the NFL once said, we'll never allow a franchise in that den of sin and inequity because it's just, it's just wrong.
Yeah, I was just looking at one of my notes when I was writing this piece, and I was thinking, if you don't think your teams are mediocre, then why is it when the Wolves are the road game that LeBron sits out and the Twins host the series where the Royals rest their bullpen?
Oh, man.
It's the truth.
Yeah.
LeBron remember last year he rested against the Timberwolves.
Yeah.
So,
yes, sir.
The good news is, though, a quote from Game of Thrones, Stretch, winter is coming, and so are the Timberwolves.
That is really a happy thought, isn't it?
Well,
I don't know which I dread more.
Well, and I've got a strong finish to this segment here, even though it seems like it's failing miserably.
No.
Yeah, the strangely Howard Jones, the artist I mentioned at the top of the segment.
Howard Jones, you're really going to melt that one, aren't you?
Well, listen, Howard
when
Jones.
in doubt, go to Howard Jones.
Howard Jones had a much bigger hit that was on the same album. That song is entitled "Things Can Only Get Better."
Well, I don't know if I take much solace in that either. You're really not doing anything for my chronic endogenous depression.
Well,
I need a dopamine fix right away after this.
I'm here to counter whatever arguments you make and get to the bottom of what happened at the lunchroom incident.
Well, the lunchroom incident remains something of a mystery. And I didn't even get to talk about the 51-year-old Chevy Impala that remains anchored in my driveway. But I guess we'll talk about that next week.
Let's do it, Mike.
All right.
You got a tow truck to wait for.
Well, in theory.
There he is. Mike Stretch Gelfand. You can read his stuff in the Cold Omaha section of ZoneCoverage.com. This here podcast, Mike Talks Big, is a part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. You can subscribe on iTunes and Google Music. Have a great week.